Good evening. Welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources that we hope will help improve your life. I'm Stu Reed, and here's my co-host, Dave Bernstein. Hey, Dave.
Hello. Let me tell you about the folks we have on here.
Please.
They are two of the very best in the business. I met them both a dozen years ago working on the broadband plan. Scott was the chief economist. I don't remember what John's title was, but he was the one who worked on adoption and what we now call digital equity. There is nobody in the United States who's more qualified in these subjects than our two guests. Stu, you have some details about them.
Yeah, I just want to give a little bit of background. Scott Wallsten is president and senior fellow at the Technology Policy Institute, and also a senior fellow at the Georgetown Center for Business and Public Policy. He's an economist with expertise in industrial organization and public policy. Among his many accomplishments, Scott was the economics director for the FCC's National Broadband Plan. John Horrigan is a national expert on technology adoption, digital inclusion, and evaluating the outcomes and impacts of programs designed to promote communications technology adoption and use. He served at the FCC as a member of the leadership team for the development of the National Broadband Plan. So we've got two really distinguished guests here, Dave. Where do you want to begin? Throw it to you.
Well, I made a point of looking at some of the things they've been saying. These people are both Washington players. That means they filed and write a lot of things. And they're well enough known in Washington that the people who make decisions listen to them. So I thought I'd bring their ideas here to the air, and maybe we'll feed them back to somebody in Washington if we have something interesting. I still have a little bit of an audience there. So I thought I'd start out with something that John wrote. You wrote, "Cost is the chief reason for not having broadband." Now, you're really strong on that. You had some points I missed. Why don't you tell us what you're thinking?
Well, that data point comes from a national survey I conducted this past summer of lower income households. And the survey data showed that a plurality of non-broadband subscribers said that cost, and this is either their monthly internet bill or the cost of having a computer, was the chief reason that they didn't have broadband. The other point that I always make in these contexts is that the reasons for not being online are multiple and can vary across different demographic groups. So if cost is a barrier for you, there's a likelihood that you also think that your smartphone does a great job, and you don't want broadband for that reason. If you express a concern over digital skills, there's a likelihood that you also think that cost is a reason. And then there's a chunk of people who say the internet is not for me, I really don't need it. They tend to be a very specific demographic subgroup. They are typically very old, very low income, and they tend to live alone. So if you look at the data, you do see clear patterns, and cost is the main reason that people cite, or the most important reason that people cite. But the data can also tell you about how better to target resources to address these issues given variation across demographic subgroups.
Now, Scott's done a lot of work on that. That's going to be interesting. And Scott has some observations about wireless we're going to get back on. But let's stick on this on people not taking broadband. I came to the conclusion a long time ago that the only thing proven to help people is bringing down the effective price, ideally with a little bit of help at the beginning. And I don't know what else really does work. And let me explain why I came to that conclusion. Comcast has hooked up over 1 million people with their Comcast Internet Essentials. If you have a kid in school and are poor, they have you get food stamps and various other ways to qualify. They will sell you a decent connection for $10. It's now 50 meg down, and I think it's 6 or 10 up, which is perfectly adequate for almost everything, including having 3 kids doing school on Zoom. So I know that can work because 1 million people who signed up. But I was very disappointed at all the people who tried to persuade people, talk them into, to make them understand why they should adopt broadband, and gives them skills, the ability to recognize when the president of the United States is lying, both of which are great goals. But every program that I've looked at just about hasn't done anything for people and hasn't been effective. John, have you seen what works? Have you seen any program that's been effective and measured to be effective other than which isn't dealing with the cost factor?
Well, if you're talking about getting the word out to people, yes, it's true that something like 1/4 of eligible households have heard of things like the emergency broadband benefit or other discount programs. So there's more to be done to get the word out. In terms of what people say they trust as a messenger for this, for information on these programs, internet service providers are the least trusted entities for information about discount programs. That comes across clearly in survey data. Community anchor institutions like public libraries are far more trusted. So I think the idea of having ISPs run ads and that's going to get your uptake going gangbusters is probably misplaced. Partnering with public libraries, I think will have a lot more of a payoff. And in fact, I think that's something that over time that Comcast learned with Internet Essentials. I think they learned that them saying it's a great deal wasn't enough, even if it was a great deal. It was necessary for them to partner with libraries and schools to spread the word about their Internet Essentials program. And I think that helped their uptake after doing that.
So let me bring in maybe a little bit of controversy here. John and I mostly agree on everything, so I'll just say the one thing that one of the things that we maybe don't. Recent survey data also shows people saying that cost is a factor less and less frequently. The Pew data shows it going down steadily, and in the Pew surveys, it's not the leading reason that people give. That doesn't mean it isn't, but because there are different ways to do surveys and so on. But it's definitely become less important, and that's consistent with other data on prices and the existence of these programs like Internet Essentials, which all the other cable companies have copied, and I mean copied in a good way. I mean we want these sorts of things. And you're right though, most and also just what we do agree on, there's a very complicated set of reasons why people don't subscribe, and it's hard for policy to address them. And Dave, you say that you've looked at all of the various subsidy programs that exist and that you don't see that they've done any good, and that's true. That's the GAO finds that, the Government Accountability Office, the OMB, independent academic studies, and so on. But mostly, those focus on the rural programs, the high cost programs, and that's because most of the money there just goes to rural ISPs who like to buy nice airplanes for themselves, and then there's never any competition for those funds. The ACP, I mean, it is early days that what was the emergency broadband benefit and the affordable connectivity program. Those have a lot of features that we want to see in programs to help people. First of all, they're targeted at low-income people, which is the biggest group that's not online, and they're not exactly vouchers, but they're pretty close. That lets them make choices, and I do wish the FCC would release a lot more information about how it's being used and how it's going, but it does bring broadband plans down, the price for many people down to zero, and that's a big deal.
Let's stick with this a minute, because cost is the most effective tool. We had the government spent billions last year to get people connected with the emergency broadband program. It was an utter and total failure, and the FCC doesn't want to admit it. 10 million people plus signed up for a $50 a month subsidy. Almost all of them were people who already had broadband. Now, it may be good to help poor people, but that wasn't what the program was about. The program is to get people connected. And last year,
that's actually not true. I mean, we can debate whether the goal
You can
is the right
say-
goal to help to provide cost relief for low-income people to defray their existing broadband bill. But the legislation aimed at two things. It aimed at non-adopters. It aimed at people with service who might need economic relief that came about because of the pandemic. I do, however, think that we don't know enough about whether the program is adding subscribers, which is an important goal, or just defraying the cost to existing subscribers. I think we do need to know the mix of those two, and I don't think we have enough information.
And actually,
about
this
that.
debate was in fact one of the problems with the enabling legislation of the EBB, because it didn't actually it didn't say what the goal was. And so it didn't say specifically the goal is to get more people online, or that the goal is just to basically give low-income people more money. Either of those is a perfectly fine goal, but it didn't say. And so it makes it really hard to evaluate a program if you don't know what it's supposed to do.
Yeah,
and
it
so
didn't really
that's
say
an
what
issue.
the right, it didn't really place, enumerate a priority. It said,
Right, exactly.
let's do this, both are important, but it didn't really get into what I think Scott and I both think is an important detail.
Yeah.
Okay, John, there actually is the data you're asking for. The billion spent is enough that at minimum, you would expect an increase in the number of people subscribing. We see the opposite. We just got the national numbers for 2021. It's down 1 million people from 2020. There is no way that that program persuaded a lot of people to hook up, and we saw that decline. And so that goal, which to me is the first one, clearly doesn't know. And the reason we don't know is that the people at the FCC don't want us to know. They've already been excoriated by the Los Angeles Times, and know it because I've asked them about it, for not asking the question when people sign up, do you have service? Which would be a simple thing to do as part of the sign-up service. And so they don't have any numbers. But a California survey looked at where the people were signing up, whether those were the places where there were most people who didn't have service, and a number of other things. It was very clear from that data, which I picked up from the LA Times, that it didn't bring many people on. I've asked them for the data. They don't have the data. There's no reason they don't have the data other than that they want to be able to go out and say, 10 million people are using our program, so we must be doing something right. In practice, what's going on is that when you sign up with Time Warner or Comcast, or probably the others, those are the ones I happen to know, as you sign up, they're going to ask, do you possibly qualify for the low-income service, and then put you through automatically, and that's where the signups are coming. And that's not reaching the people that we're trying to reach who really need the money. Not that it's not.
Let me make two points on that, because I think there's some interesting things going on. First is, in the Pew surveys, even after the pandemic started, the share of people who are not connected, who say they're not interested in broadband, stayed the same. Which is baffling, because we sort of have this idea that demand increased, and we know that some of the other numbers increased. So I don't understand that result, but it's interesting, and it would be consistent with not seeing increases in this other thing. But the second is that I think there's also a political economy reason why why we're basically seeing not effects on the margin of the EBB, additional people not signing up, and that's that it's not politically popular or even maybe possible for a federal program to target people who don't have it. So Comcast can say you can't sign up for this program unless you don't have broadband, and then some people get all mad and say, well, then you're excluding all the other low-income people. But then the answer is, well, we're trying to get more people online. If you give the discount to somebody who's online, you haven't done anything. And that's a company can do that. It doesn't seem like the government can. And so I'm not disagreeing with you that it's a problem. Because it dilutes the effect of the program, but I don't want to blame the FCC for it, because I don't know. It's just so I don't know that it's politically sustainable.
Let me make a point about 2 points, one about churn and one about this category in surveys not interested. First on churn. Churn is a possible fly in your ointment, Dave, about the number of subscribers going down, because survey data does show that as many as 20% of households lost internet service during the pandemic due to the recession that happened as the pandemic got going. Survey data also shows that about, say in Philadelphia, about 9% of households, mostly low income, say that they have service due to a discount or EBB type of subsidy. So people were going on, some people were coming on, and the churn may have an impact on those net numbers. The other point, just that Scott is right to say that this not interested category not changing is a little bit baffling. That has always, as a choice category in surveys, been a little bit difficult because, and this comes across when you do focus groups to dig into that phenomenon, people who say they're not interested oftentimes don't want to admit that they can't afford something. I've never quite known how to handle that other than to analyze the demographics and income levels behind those folks who give that response, but it becomes a difficult item to handle in the context of interpreting this data.
Everything John said is true, but it doesn't change the basic conclusions here. But to make things clear, we're talking about two different things. One is what kind of program goes forward? Do you go on the radio on shows like this and explain to people why broadband is great and why they should subscribe? The broadband stimulus a decade ago spent hundreds of millions on programs like that. They were a dismal failure, although it's very hard to get solid data. That's one thing, and that's what I opened with John saying. Cost is the only thing proven to get people connected, which means I wouldn't, well, let me put it to Scott, since Scott brought it up. Would you fund a program for digital equity at this point, or would you want to do trials and tests to see what works first?
Well, I'm always in favor of trials and tests because I don't think we do nearly enough of them. And the one time that the FCC did them back in 2013, it yielded really fascinating results that we wish we would have delved into further, because it was hard to get people to sign up for these special programs in the first place. There were weird results about digital literacy training that, some people, in one case, people were willing to pay an extra $10 a month to not take digital literacy training. Just sort of all these results that we'd love to know more about. So I'm absolutely in favor of more pilots and figuring out what's right. I mean, I do think we're on the right track with ACP because but I would still want to do experiments with it. Don't get me wrong, because I'd like to know whether we're on the right track. But I think there are things, even with there are things we could change. For example, I'm not thrilled about it going through the ISPs. The problem is that over time, the ISPs have an incentive to raise the price of their cheapest plans to whatever the subsidy is. I mean, if you're in the pricing side of an ISP, you should be looking forward to that, to this opportunity to raise prices. It's just a natural incentive. But if we could figure out a way to change it so that the subsidy goes directly into the hands of the people who want to use it, say maybe like a SNAP card kind of thing, and then when they pay the ISP is just getting money. They don't know whether the person's using a voucher or not. That would help a little bit to ameliorate the problem. So it's not like I think it's perfect. I think there are lots of trials, lots of things we could try, lots of things to learn. So yeah.
And we're going to go to Stu in a minute, who's actually out there on the streets or at least on the radio and in community groups, working on this and really understand it in a way almost no one in Washington does. Because most of the people in Washington are folks like Stanford PhD who don't spend that much time among poor people, no matter how well-intentioned and how carefully they study things.
I think that was, I think you were insulting me. I'm not sure.
No, I'm not insulting you.
Do you feel seen, Scott?
Me too. Right, exactly.
You spent you spent your last 20 years being an academic whatever. You don't know what's going on in the street as well as Stu, who's out there for 20 years hooking up people. That's not an insult.
No, I would deny that. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, no, that's a big thing. And so I misspoke before when I said we went down by 1 million. Actually, it went down by 1.5 million, almost a third. So all the things that John is saying about, oh, this could explain some of it and this could explain some of it, absolutely true. But it went down so much more that it overwhelms anything like that. It just turned out that giving people money through their ISP didn't get many people connected, and we have to do better than that. And it's a well-known problem, but it's politically tough to do it. Because Jessica Rosenworcel on the FCC wants to tell the President of the United States that her broadband whatever program connected 10 million people, when in fact 9 million plus of them almost certainly would have been connected anyway. Not bad to help poor people, but we want to get people connected. But let me come back to the other thing, because John has a lot of perspective. No, on that. I'm going to let Stu talk about how. But John, how many programs have you seen that don't do something about price, that have been tested and demonstrated to get people to connect or really do things on the internet much more effectively? What have you seen?
I do think, and I've done some research and Scott's done some research to show that Internet Essentials has, in fact, had an impact. Scott may want to speak to this, but research that shows that in places where discount programs like Internet Essentials was available, adoption went up at a rate greater than you would otherwise expect in similar types of poor neighborhoods that didn't have Internet Essentials. I think that is in part a result of the discount. It's part result of what I'll call a ground game that ISPs have to do, like Comcast, to reach into those communities. And I alluded to it before. ISPs, for better or worse, are not the most effective and trusted messengers. The same thing is true for government. So you have to find a way to find those right partners within communities to get the word out. And that experience, I think, is being borne out as we get the ACP going.
John, let me ask you a question, because with Internet Essentials, it was these people on the ground who helped, but at the same time, what you said, people don't trust ISPs. How did they get over that hump and deal with that problem? Because it was, at the end of the day, Comcast organizing it.
And Comcast would hold events with schools, at schools, with libraries, at libraries, to put the word out. So, I guess the nice thing about schools is, teachers have authority over telling where students to sit, and they can call them in and they can listen to
so it was the partnerships itself, really.
Yeah.
I have the strong answer to your question, because it comes from David Cohn, who set up the program at Comcast. He said that what made all the difference was the schools. And that was where they got just about everybody. The libraries, I'm sure, are also good, but he was talking about the schools. But I didn't ask you that, John. Think about this a minute, because I want to hear from Stu, because he's got the experience. But what I asked you is whether you knew any programs that didn't have a cost benefit that were effective, because that would tell you how important the education and the enhancement are. But Stu, you've been out there on the street and you do things very differently than charter. What works? What did you see?
Well, a couple of things. One, there is a built-in resistance for low-income and poor folks to sales pitches. And particularly when they come from the government and when they come from big corporations. Just on GP, general principle, there's a built-in resistance to that. And for big companies and government to say, we got something for you, poor people, that you can afford, there's an automatic negative reaction to that. So a couple of things. One, cost is certainly, and I'd agree with both John and Scott, that cost is the biggest hurdle. And I'd also agree often that folks don't want to tell you that cost is a hurdle. When you don't have money, you don't always want to say that you don't have money. So that's a problem. But to the notion that you guys are talking about, the ground game and who do you trust, what we have found is that our group partners with the actual users. We partner with community groups, with resident associations to actually bring the service so that the people that are communicating to the end users are actual end users themselves. They're actual community folks themselves that are helping to bring the service. So the trust goes way up. The other issue that I'd want to bring up is and this goes to I'm not sure if it was Scott or John that was talking about being a little bit mystified as to why folks resist when maybe it's not cost. What is the other category? And I would say it has to do with relevance. One of the things that we have found is that, one, we give the service to the people. We don't charge them. We're now that the ACP is up and running, we're going to be utilizing that. But the first issue is you give the service to the people, so you're not asking them to pay upfront. The second piece is that you're bringing applications and services that have some meaning and some utility to them. Just to make the presumption that folks know that the internet is something that they need, I think is a bit of a leap, especially for the hardcore folks, the older folks, the lower income folks who haven't had it. So why do I need it? What applications and services are on there that will be of some utility to me? So we haven't decided that. We have kind of gone to the community and gotten from the ground up. What are some of those services? What are some of the things that you need that maybe the internet could help solve? And when we bring those applications and those services to folks, and oh, by the way, in order to get them, you need the internet, it's a light bulb moment. So it's, oh, okay, you have something called the virtual tenant patrol where I'm able to see what's going on in my lobby. I'm able to see my kids in the playground downstairs. I'm able to see what's happening at the front door of my building. Oh, okay, that's something I can use. So when you give them some things like that, it kind of changes the equation. And that didn't come from us. That came from folks on the ground, from community leaders who told us they needed to see that. They were having issues. They wanted to see what's going on in their lobbies at their front door. And so there are other services and applications like that that come from the ground up that use broadband, but you're not leading with the broadband, you're leading with the services that folks say they want. When you do that, it kind of changes the game. And again, when you involve the actual folks on the ground in the provision of the services, we partner with local resident groups, local community associations, and like the guys were saying, the trust factor with schools and libraries, well, the trust factor with your neighbor and with your community associations is pretty high. So when those folks are bringing services, it really changes the equation. And that's what we found is working for us in the low-income communities of New York City.
What are some of the other things that people say they need? Because we always hear people want, I mean, in the policy debates, it's always very high-minded stuff about how people interact with the government and blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not really the way people use the internet. I mean, people like entertainment and all kinds of things.
Yeah.
And so what did they tell you? I mean, the lobby one was really interesting, but
they want to be able to connect with social services. Folks should not have to, our view, and what we're hearing from folks on the ground, they shouldn't have to pay in order to connect with social services, to find out what's going on with their medication, to talk to their doctor, to find out what's going on with their benefits. That shouldn't cost anything. And I see Dave is raising his hand. Dave, you wanted to chime in?
No, I don't want to chime in, but we have to take our break.
Okay. I guess I'm going on a little bit. Yeah, we are at the halfway point here. And we need to let folks know that this is WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. And this is Community and Technology with Dave Burstein and Stu Reed, special guests John Horrigan and Scott Wallsten. And we'll be right back after a brief musical break, so stay tuned. Okay, we're back. Had a brief musical break there with a little Gary Bartz. This community of technology with Dave Bursey and Stu Reed, special guests John Horrigan and Scott Wallsten. Before the break, we were talking a little bit about some of the things that that our group here in New York, the Digital Divide Partners and Smart Community Initiative, have been doing to kind of stimulate broadband adoption. And I was talking a bit about some of the applications and services that folks have asked us for, that we've delivered, that use the broadband, that kind of really stimulate adoption. One of the ones that really resonated was we started a streaming radio station. One of the issues that folks in public housing have is they say there is never any good stories about us on the news, on TV, on the radio, on the paper, and it's true. All you hear about is all the crumbling buildings, the crumbling infrastructure, the crime, the rodents, whatever. And there's so much good stuff going on in public housing. So we have started in a number of developments, community streaming radio stations that enable residents to come online, to come into a studio space and talk about things that are going on in their communities, often good things that are going on in their community. That was something that really we didn't anticipate, but again, they came to us with that. Another thing that is emergency communications. I'm working with a group at City College called the WHCR Emergency Broadcast Team. And we've reached out to communities and started to educate folks about what to do in an emergency. And we're starting to use the broadband and spin-offs of the broadband to put together emergency communication tools and systems so that when there's an emergency, folks have a way to communicate with each other. Something that, a lot of folks haven't even thought about, and unless you're on the ground in some of these communities, you don't even know. So that's something that they say, oh, wow, this is something that we really need. Another is just quality of life issues related to their environment. Things like air quality. We're putting a wireless air quality sensors that enable residents to monitor the quality of air. There's a big problem with asthma and other issues related to air quality in the low-income neighborhoods where we service. So we're starting to put that in place and giving folks a way to monitor in real time themselves. Another thing is a way for them to monitor what's going on in their area relative to, are the elevators working? Is heat working? Is trash being removed? And ways to use the broadband to communicate that for them to communicate among themselves. Again, so putting tools in their hands for them to use. And it's been a game changer. So as opposed to, the top-down approach, here, look what we have for you. No, here's some tools. What can you do with them? And we're learning as we go, because we're learning from the folks that, we hadn't even thought about that, but look at what they're doing with the tools.
It sounds like a common theme is that you're giving people a voice.
Yeah, that is true, Scott. That's exactly what it is. Voice and control.
Right.
Yeah.
And the watchword these days is digital inclusion, right? And by giving people voice, it does help them feel included in ways, that wasn't the case before. I put into a survey years ago a question about how does having internet service help your life? And you sort of do a list and you do the usual suspects on that list. It helps with education. It helps me interface with healthcare providers. It helps with government services. But I also put in, does it, a choice to the effect, does it make your life easier because you can more effectively schedule stuff for your kid or for your household? Mm-hmm. And that was a big response, yes. And those are I think the kinds of soft or psychological benefits that are part of this beyond the instrumental ones of got internet, found job, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Dave?
We've got two of the best in the business here, and I like to pick their brain. Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask John to come up with examples where it didn't bring down the cost, but it did persuade people to get involved, get broadband, do other things differently. But let's take advantage of Scott, who's an economist. Question that everybody in Washington is avoiding. Should we spend $100,000 per home to bring fiber or wireless or whatever you bring, instead of expecting that 44 hundredths of 1% that is really expensive to use satellite. Satellite's not great, but it is a reliable 50/10. How do we decide that question, Scott?
Well, you set that up a little bit of a leading way, and of course, in a way that I agree with. I don't think we should be spending that much per home. It's incredibly wasteful, and we know that the Fiber Association is doing a lot to try to convince people that they need things they don't need, and in some places it will surely make sense, absolutely, and in other places it won't. And there are lots of options that we have now. And including fixed wireless, which is a more robust option than it has been in the past. And we were talking about that a little earlier. We can talk about it more. We'll see whether the low Earth orbit satellites, Starlink, what it amounts to. But there's certainly no reason to bring fiber to everyone. It just doesn't make sense. And another piece of that, since you set me up as an economist, I'll talk about the economist's favorite topic, which of course is auctions. And the rural folks have sort of created this narrative that the last auction for universal service subsidies, it was called the Rural Development Opportunity Fund, RDOF, was a failure because of some weird outcomes. And it may turn out to be, but it had nothing to do with it being an auction. It had to do with the eligibility requirements for participating and identifying unserved areas, and those would have been the same no matter what mechanism it used. But the rural interests, meaning in this case the ISPs, not the not actual people, they don't like it because it gives other companies a chance to win subsidies. And so they managed to have everything about auctions stricken from the infrastructure bill. And so now it's just up to the states to distribute how they want. Some states will do a good job and want to do a good job and want to try. In other states, it's going to go to the governor's friends. It's a terrible system that's coming up. And I do think NTIA, the federal government, will do everything it can, but it doesn't have much authority. And I guess we're still trying to figure out what authority it does have, but it's going to be a mess.
If I could just add to something Scott said, I'm not an economist, but maybe I could play one on TV. I would say, prioritize funding decisions and show your work. If you're going to apply for a grant, have a required worksheet that says how many homes you're going to pass with this infrastructure. What's the cost per home? There's probably a fair amount of low-ish hanging fruit for a lot of unconnected homes. And that's where the funding should go. I would agree with Scott. And the way you framed the question is an obvious one, which is, there's no reason to spend $100,000 to connect the house with fiber when it can get satellite. But show the work so that people can quickly, not 10 years from now, but within 18 months, look back and determine whether these investments were wasteful.
Scott, you went further than that. I think you wanted numbers coming every month.
I really want complete transparency. I mean, complete is a difficult word because there's always more that somebody could provide. But at a minimum, we need to know every proposal that is put in, regardless of whether the proposal is chosen. And then there should be benchmarks that companies have to meet, and they should be reported. I might have said monthly, I think, but quarterly. And that's something that was not done before, not done to the last time we tried this. In fact, even though it was all supposed to be public, when a friend of mine, Greg Roston, and I wrote a paper about that earlier program, BTOP, we wanted access to the proposals, and NTIA sent us back a letter that said, sure, give us $250,000 and we'll go pull them for you. And the law said they were supposed to be public. We put the letter in the paper we wrote. It's a nice appendix. And then eventually they did make it public, a couple of years later. But that should not happen with this. We must be transparent.
And you can go even further than that. The number that's easy to get as a number is how many homes have been passed and how many people subscribed. I tried to find out the broadband stimulus. And among the people who said, I don't know, was Jonathan Edelstein, who's a good guy and a friend, who ran a third of that program at the RUS. And when I asked him, after most of it had happened, how many people did you connect? He said, I don't know. Actually, he didn't say, I don't know. I said, I got to check that. And he went back and he checked with his people and he said, we don't know. Now, that's a deliberate attempt to avoid looking bad when you're a government politician. And so I understand why Jessica doesn't want people to say, oh, her, what was it, EBB program connected very few people, although the evidence has now become overwhelming. But I know I thoroughly agree with you two guys, and I'm even filing Freedom of Interest Act effects. But let's stick on this one. Scott, you said you didn't know how to persuade the states to do this, and some would do right and some would do wrong. I was looking at the same problem, and I realized something that the feds could do is make very clear guidelines that they should be following. Should you spend $100,000? Well, I think Davidson, who's running the program, should very clearly say anything above some number needs careful review and should be reviewed with the feds as well. And whether that number should be 100,000, which sounds absurd, 30,000, which is what RUS just spent on a program in Alaska, or 10,000, that's something we need to decide. And I'd love to press you on that, but I don't think I should press you right away. Let's go.
I wouldn't know what the number is, but you're right. You can pretty easily get up to absurd numbers.
Yeah. Now let me go to another one. We're all saying that we have to bring the costs down. My feeling is that since there's a $30 subsidy out there, and it's completely realistic to deliver service to 99% of the population for $30 a month, that should be the measure for the low cost. John, Scott, what do you think low cost should be?
Well, I do think that the $30 subsidy means that people can get service for close to nothing, given that it's possible to do an offering at that price for a lot of these companies. And that, according to survey data at least, will resonate with lots of very low-income households in particular, who have a real hard time affording internet service. The thing I'll just add as a bit of nuance, when you look at survey data, when you talk to people in focus groups, low-income households will rearrange the budget to pay for service, to pay market rates, to pay for quality service. But the $30 subsidy can help them a lot in terms of maintaining and keeping service over time. So I think that will fit the needs of lots of non-adopters, the $30 subsidy, which will mean out of pocket they're not paying anything.
And to add to that, I mean, it really can be closer to it can be 40 because you can do Lifeline, which is $9.25, I guess, and the ACP together. So you can get both of them at the same time. And while I don't know what the price of a plan should be, like I said earlier, I'm a little bit worried that the structure of the ACP will allow ISPs to keep raising the price of their cheapest plan. And I don't think the right way to do it is to set a price for them, because there will always be ways around that. It's to change the nature of the program so that they can't price discriminate in that way. Because right now, a household, they can pay $0. I mean, their plan can be $0 or the plan can be $40. they're just going to pay $0. So if you're the ISP, you're thinking, well, I got to get them up to a $40 plan, and I can get $40 from the ACP instead of 10. But if you don't know who those people are, it's a much harder. So I kind of want to play around with the incentives built into the ACP to try to prevent that from happening. That would be, we'd start with, like we said, an experiment or a pilot. But yeah.
Well, let me give you another suggestion. Alan Davidson or Jessica Rosa also, or the vice president, should call up Mike Sievert at T-Mobile and says it would be darn smart business for you to offer a $30 plan to the 20% or so of the population that qualify, because most of the customers you're going to get are not your customers buying cheaper. They may upgrade one day, but come from cable. And the marginal cost of an extra person on a network, any existing network that isn't totally at its limits, is somewhere under $15 a month. It's probably under $7 a month. So Mike Sievert can make a very nice profit at $30 a month with no billing problem because the government pays them directly, and get customers that the marginal contribution, is that the right word, Scott, when I talk about this? That's not a profit.
That works for me.
Okay. Is a very good thing for his business. And that's the kind of thing I'm looking for, ideas that would work in the real world. And that's ideas I'd love to hear from you guys.
Well, sorry, go ahead, John.
Oh, I was going to make a little joke. I just wish somebody thought of that before the merger was approved, but go ahead, Scott.
We only got about a minute left, so if you can give us your final comments. And I think that's a great question, Dave. So go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the marginal cost of the cost of an additional user to the network when there's capacity has got to be very, very low. I guess the question, which Dave, you probably know the answer to, and I don't, is how much capacity is there on these new networks right now? I assume there's going to be a lot more in a year than there is today. But it's, we heard actually Brian Roberts, the CEO of Comcast, just yesterday or something, said that he didn't see fixed wireless as a competitor. That struck me as, well, he probably knows the business better than I do, but it certainly struck me as wrong, because these 5G fixed wireless networks, they work. And it's not like, I mean, even the wireless ones before, they were competition, but on the edges. This is the first time I've seen that I can use my hotspot for every single thing in my house. And that's a big deal.
And I can get 90 down, 50 up, which is faster than my cable upstream, for $20 less. And I would be delighted to change and would. That's not true for everybody, because wireless does not have capacity everywhere. But the mid-band spectrum that T-Mobile is using to over 200 million people, and Verizon and AT&T are building, has enormous capacity. They couldn't fill it for 5 years if they gave it away. In most places, there will be congested places, but in 90% of the network, they have loads of capacity. But John, we haven't heard from you. A wrap up.
To Scott's final point, I will say that this is an argument for what he was saying about having pilots and some experiments to do this research as these projects unfold, as these initiatives unfold. What I think would be unfortunate is to wait 3 years and do ex post assessment at that point. Yes, that would be helpful, but try to build in some ongoing data gathering in order to do course corrections and to more precisely answer the kinds of questions you've been raising, Dave.
Yes, but we have 4 people on this phone call who have been doing this work for more than 10 years. I met John and Scott more than 10 years ago working on the broadband plan. I met Stu 25 years ago building networks in the Bronx. We don't know everything, but a lot of this stuff is pretty darn obvious, including what's not working and how much waste there is. Goodbye, folks.
Okay, well, I just want to thank Scott Wallsten and John Horrigan for joining Dave Bursey and myself on Community and Technology. Thank you, guys.
Thanks very much.
Thanks very much.
Great to be with you. Okay, this is Community and Technology on WHCR 90.3, the voice of Harlem. Stay tuned every Wednesday, 5 p.m. Community Technology. Thanks for tuning in. Good night, all.